everyone, and welcome to the first episode of Token Engineering as Public Goods. It's an interview series that is dedicated to exploring the new and emergent field of token engineering. This series is hosted by the Token Engineering Commons, a distributed community that is dedicated to developing a public goods economy centered on advancing this nascent field of engineering. The TEC offers grants to projects that are making meaningful strides to advance the field through our token engineering grant rounds. To date, the TEC has distributed nearly $500,000 in public funding in the fields of token engineering research, education, and tooling. We'll soon be hosting our third grant round of the year. And if you are a project or individual who is interested in becoming a sponsor of our TE grant program, please do reach out to us on our Discord. We'd love to have your support. Today we have Jackson from yAuditDAO to discuss the ins and outs of smart contract auditing, what it is, why it's important, and how to get involved if you're interested. So welcome, Jackson. I'm really excited to have you here. Perhaps we can start this off with you providing an introduction to who you are, how you got into this space, and what has drawn you to the field of smart contract auditing in the first place.
Sure. Yeah, sounds good. That was an interesting intro. I didn't know you guys were doing grants. Yeah, I might contribute. I'll ping you after we get done with this. Um, yeah, intro about myself. I'm not sure how far to go back, but I guess I'll start with my tech career. I started my life as a musician after doing maybe a year of touring. Before that, I spent most of my adolescence kind of mastering the guitar. I decided to pivot into technology. I taught myself how to code while I was on tour, and eventually went back to school. I was originally getting a degree in music. Left, went did touring, learned how to code, came back, got a computer science degree, and I ended up joining Amazon after getting the computer science degree. I was at Amazon for around 5 years. The last year, I switched into management. But the whole time I was at Amazon, I kind of wanted to start my own consulting business. So the experience at Amazon was primarily like a kind of a stepping stone, right? I wanted to get FANG on my resume, but I was like, I don't want to stay here longer than a year. I know it's funny, that I ended up staying there for 5 years, but my original intent when I joined Amazon was only to be there for a year. And so I sort of looked around, and there were two nascent technologies that I thought would be good to become a consultant in. One was machine learning, the other one was crypto. This was right around the time of the Ethereum ICO, so it was like 2017-ish. And so I ended up deciding to do crypto. And sort of the first real bubble in Ethereum was the ICO bubble. And so I started sort of reading a lot of technical information. I was blogging a lot, working with clients as a consultant, reading a lot of white papers, writing a lot of white papers, just helping out with ICOs as much as I could. One of my early clients was Aave. Back then, they were called ETHLend. They had pivoted to the brand Aave like maybe 2 years after that or something like that. And then I went to go work for Block One. They were sort of the creators of one of the first Ethereum killers. If you've been in the space long enough, you've heard of EOS. And so I worked as an independent consultant for Block One for about a year and a half, something like that. And then around this time, DeFi summer took off, and people were putting crazy amounts of money into smart contracts, but they were also getting hacked regularly. And this was around the same time that it became clear that like EOS wasn't going to be the Ethereum killer that everybody was sort of saying it was. And so I decided to pivot back to the EVM. EOS wasn't an EVM chain, but back to the EVM and specifically to security because of all these hacks that were happening during DeFi summer. And so that's how I ended up kind of making a transition finally into smart contract security. It wasn't something that I think a lot of people that end up in smart contract security sort of come from Web2 security where they're doing pen tests and stuff like that. And Web3 is just kind of a branch of security to them. Whereas, I've sort of been Web3 native the entire time, working primarily as a software engineer at Amazon, now currently at Robinhood. So yeah, that's sort of how I ended up in the space.
Yeah, no, it's really awesome. I really love hearing everybody's like kind of journey into the crypto and Web3 space in general. everybody comes from so many different places and so many different
Right.
angles and interests, and so it's really awesome to hear your experience and your transition from musician into code development, big Web 2 companies into this kind of interesting field of smart contract auditing. But for those who are unfamiliar with this topic, how would you describe a smart contract audit? I feel like a lot of developers understand the process of what an audit is, but lack an understanding of its implications within smart contract development. And so, I was hoping you could kind of give, like, for those who are unfamiliar with the topic, kind of a
Yeah.
description of what it's like.
hmm Um, yeah. I mean, so quite honestly, I don't like the way that we do this sort of stuff in Web3. But maybe that's a conversation we can have after I answer your question. Um, so like in general, right, when you're writing code for a company, especially, a big company like Amazon or maybe even Robinhood, the typical way of deploying software is you have some sort of CI/CD pipeline. You pull down the repo, you make some incremental change, you send it up for review from your teammates. They look at the code, right? They try and find bugs in it, and then eventually they sign off on it. You ship the code, it goes through the CI/CD pipeline. Hopefully, some battery of tests runs. Maybe you have some sort of canary where you're like sort of checking the results um, for like 10% of the traffic or something like that, right? And then, okay, after all these steps, finally your code gets into production. And it still might break, it still might cause issues. And if it does, it's like, okay, that's fine. You just roll it back and, roll back to a prior deployment or revert the diff or something like that, right? The problem with Web3, at least as it stands today, is like you don't have a lot of this CI/CD machinery. And so what I've heard people liken smart contract development to is similar to like building software for rocket ships or airplanes or something like this, right? It's like or medical devices, right? This is like critical software where if you miss just even like the smallest thing, that's sufficient to lose vast sums of money, right? And so the way it works in Web3 is, your development team might, write your suite of smart contracts, and you guys might be doing some kind of review amongst yourselves as well to try and catch bugs and everything like that. But the sort of like last step before you finally say, okay, these contracts are ready to go live and go on mainnet or whatever chain you're launching on, is you have a smart contract audit. And what that entails is usually I guess it depends, right? We can talk about that as well. There's many different paths your code can take to have security experts review your code. One is a traditional auditing firm like Trail of Bits. Another one is a contest site like C4 or Sherlock or these other ones. Another one is I work for DAOs, and so that's another way of doing it. They're kind of like a hybrid between a contest and a traditional auditing firm. And then, so we'll look at your code, we'll review it holistically. It's usually a handful of people if you're working with a traditional firm. If it's a contest, then sort of any average Joe can show up off the street and pour through your code and submit findings. But so the end state here is that you're going to have a report given to you by the security experts who have looked at your code, and they're going to have findings in that report, and they'll sort of be ranked based on like critical or high vulnerabilities, meaning like it's very easy to steal money out of the contract or for your users to lose money or whatever. Then they'll go down to medium findings, low findings, gas findings, informational findings. Informational just meaning like, hey, I noticed this weird thing about your implementation, but there's no way for you to lose money or anything like that. I just thought I'd mention it, right? Once you have the report, usually the team goes back, they'll review the report and decide, okay, are we going to fix these? And if we are going to fix them, what does that look like? And then they'll sort of make the fixes. The audit team will look at the fixes, and hopefully by the time this is all done, you're ready to push your code on mainnet and start having users deposit funds into it. I saw there's a question. I don't know
Yeah,
if we
no,
want to
no,
do
yeah.
question.
In terms of the investigative process, like, you compared the, from one perspective of where you have kind of like this decentralized method of kind of putting the code out there and letting people go through it and find their own bugs and their own kind of discoveries. And then you have this kind of more formal where you have like strict, tight knit teams who are actually doing this. Is there a benefit to one way or the other, or is there, weaknesses and strengths to both processes?
Yeah, that's a great question. I give a talk often about just like the business landscape of smart contract auditing because I think new people in the space aren't really familiar with the security practices in Web3 are sort of like paralyzed by the number of options and style of audit you can kind of get. And so it's probably good to like pause and go, okay, what do these each of these entail? Um, it's tough for me to say because what if I try and tell you one's better than the other, then I'm gonna piss somebody off, anybody off, right? There's some people who live and die by like contests are the only way. There's solo smart contract auditors that's just one man shop. They'll say live and die by solo auditing, traditional firms, right? There was a talk, I think, at DevConnect, uh, one of the big conferences a few months ago where they had like a panel of all these people. They had Spearbit, TrailerBits, C4, right? The founders of all these companies up sort of talking about the benefits of their different perspective approaches to the business. And so it's like there's no real one size fits all. What I can tell you is sort of like what's been my experience. Um, the contests are really good because you're throwing many eyeballs at the contracts, and so you're more likely to get good stuff. The problem is it's often a pain in the ass to get the diamonds in the rough, right? Like you might get 500 things thrown at you, and maybe only 10 of them are like actual valid findings, right? And so it's like if you're willing to sift through all that crap in order to get to the findings, your code is probably going to be more secure as a consequence of that. It's also less maybe personable, right? You're dealing with an organization who's sort of like managing the contest for you rather than the people who are actually looking at your code, right? So if you go to a company like TrailerBits or a DAO, like the things I work for, um, we get dumped into a Discord channel with you, and so while we're looking at your code, we're asking you questions, which sort of cuts down on the churn a little bit, I think, because um, we're not going to put something in the report if we've already had a conversation with you and you've already decided like this isn't a problem. It doesn't. I'm not worried about that or whatever. Um, Oh yeah, there was one more thing I forgot to mention when I was talking about sort of the life cycle. Is even after your code gets deployed, there are mechanisms to keep your contract safe, which are Immunify, right? So you can sort of submit a bug bounty for your protocol, such that like if somebody does find something in your code in production, rather than them going ahead and hacking it for you, they can submit a bug bounty through Immunify and get paid that way. So that's also yet another kind of alternative to all of these different ways of keeping your stuff safe.
Yeah, Immunify has been really a project that I didn't think much about until recently, as I started to kind of investigate the smart contract auditing kind of landscape, and they've really grown in the past couple years, and I think it's really interesting what they provide projects around the space, and not a lot of people know about them unless you're in that kind of security realm.
Right.
But yeah, and
There is
and
a
in
bit of
terms of
a game theory there where it's like, um, I can't remember who I was talking to about this, but oh, it was Johnny Time. I just had a conversation with him this morning. I don't know. He might be another guy you might want to have on here because he's also in the security space. But I was like complaining about a particular audit I did where it was clear that the team didn't take security that seriously, and so I'd found like two highs and two mediums, and their response was just acknowledged, like they didn't fix it. They just basically wanted to have an audit so that they could go get funds, right? Which this sort of stuff happens in the space, and it's quite frustrating as a smart contract auditor. I mean, monetarily, I get paid the same no matter what, but I don't want my name on a report if the project ends up getting hacked, even if they've acknowledged the bug that I ended up finding, right? Anyway, he was like, yeah, I don't know, maybe you should just go hack them, like do a pull a black hat or whatever, right? There's a bit of game theory there where it's like, you know, the longer you wait to get like let's take it to an extreme where you're like, I don't care about security at all. I'm just going to YOLO it and then have an Immunify bounty. You might end up paying more to the security community through that bug bounty than if you had just paid to get a smart contract audit, right? So there's a little bit of like risk management here that a protocol needs to do in order to determine, you know, is it worth getting the audit right now versus waiting and having to pay out for a bug bounty later.
Yeah, and that's another huge aspect. Looking at kind of the auditing marketplace is understanding the costs that it comes with auditing. You know, having a bug that is critical and that will cost a large sum of money being held by some hacker is not preferable to spending a good chunk of change at the beginning of your project for
Right.
smart contract auditing. But it's amazing to see how many projects opt not to go through that process, or if they do, it's like you said, they want it for the statement of hey, we're audited, regardless of the bugs that we find. Um, why do you think that is? I'm always curious to see some of these projects that get hacked and just go, what happened in the development process of your project that you miss these types of bugs?
Yeah, I think often it's almost like users. I think protocol devs are often a little bit like users where they don't realize the risk, the level of risk that they're taking when they YOLO without any sort of guardrails in place. And I think it's becoming more people are starting to realize the risks that they're taking more and more, both the users and the uh, the protocol devs, because they're starting to see these hacks happen in like larger and larger capital quantities and more frequently. But like if I put myself in my shoes back when I was doing all the consulting I was doing before I got into security, um, Solidity is like very simple language, right? There's only like so many things the syntax can do. It doesn't have generics, for example, right? There are folks working on like functional paradigms, but like even basic Solidity, like the actual language itself doesn't have that sort of stuff, right? And so I think it tends to lull people into a false sense of security because the language is very simple compared to like more advanced programming languages. And so they tend to think that it's secure, not realizing that there's a bunch of foot guns involved in both the Solidity language, but also just like when you're interacting with these dependencies, there's a lot of tricky edge cases that you might not be aware of. Like I did an audit very recently where the code broke when they used peon transfer tokens that they interacted with. Um, it's just like a bunch of small little things like that. Like unless you're in the space paying attention to the security all the time, you don't realize what what you're potentially getting yourself into. And because crypto is global, right? Like anybody can show up. There's like if your protocol starts to get a large amount of TVL, like maybe anything over $1 million, the incentive is there for a black hat to go say, okay, I'm going to look at this code and spend a month finding. Like I read a story where the Euler hacker, I think he spent like 3 months solid trying to find a bug before he finally found one and managed to drain the majority of the pool, right? If the capital's there, right, there's an incentive for an attacker to go do it. And I just don't think people are aware of the fact that there's that many eyeballs looking at their code trying to find ways of breaking it.
Yeah, and sometimes I think that when we see like a smart contract or a series of smart contracts, we even if they've been widely used from others, that the interactions between smart contracts are very poorly understood in terms of from the security standpoint. And I don't know if you've ever like can speak on like seeing a bug or maybe a reentrancy type of attack where you have a couple of smart contracts interacting with each other that have kind of unintended consequences to them.
Um, yeah, this often gets phrased um, to me as like what are the most common vulnerabilities that you've seen or whatever. And uh, the Trail of Bits did a study on this. I think it might have been sometime last year, maybe, where they put this bit of research out, and they found that like the overwhelming majority of bugs that they're finding in their audits were actually like pretty basic things like access control. So you'd think like, okay, I mean, don't get me wrong, there's a bunch of issues with dependencies and interactions between contracts, and I'll speak to some of those as well. But like probably the majority of the criticals that I found in my career have been like people leaving off modifiers, which is like just mind blowing, right? It's like if you drop one modifier in a one particular function, it's very easy to just drain the entire contract given an access. And you might think, okay, well, it might just be like changing the URI on an FT or something. Initially, you might think when you see that function, that's not that big of a deal. But the implications of having full access to just one particular function can have massive, massive impacts. Um, in terms of like things I've actually found in terms of like reentrancy and stuff like this is another thing I do often when I'm giving talks is I'll go through some of the hacks that I found actually in smart contract audits in order to show kind of what I'm finding in my day-to-day job to give people an idea of like um, both how common they are, how easy it is to miss things, but also how often I'm finding these things. Um, I think it was actually my first audit that I ever did. I got put on a trial audit at Oak Security. So the way their hiring process is, they kind of put you through an interview loop and ask you some, relatively basic, simple EVM solidity questions, and then prior to them actually sending you work, you do an audit with one of the founders so that they can kind of assess based on what they found and what you found. And the very first audit I did with them had a reentrancy in it, and it wasn't even a matter of like, uh, was there a dependency involved here or anything like that. It was just purely like the function was something like it allowed you to cancel orders or something like this, but they didn't update the state of the canceled order until after all the interactions that occurred. Right? If you're familiar with smart contract security, you've often heard about checks effects interactions. um, they weren't doing they were doing the effects at the end of the function rather than in the middle after all the interactions, which allowed you to sort of just drain the contract. And that was in my first audit, right? It wasn't like I was some seasoned professional or anything like that. It just shows you the prevalence of like even to this day, people don't understand basic security and basic vulnerabilities like reentrancy.
Is there anything that the space can do to actually improve that type of education in terms of founders and smart contract developers in general? I think that if you look at the way we develop smart contracts, there's probably a process there that is missing some
Yeah.
type of security function.
Yeah, we
But yeah,
talked about this was the thing I was saying I kind of wanted to come back to. Like one of the things that really bothers me about the space right now is that we have this concept of smart contract audits like at all. The reason why companies like Amazon and Google and these other companies they ship software the way that they do, which is this incremental approach of like, you're if a diff that I have to review at my day job ever is larger than like, I don't know, 500 lines of code, I'm sort of like entitled as the reviewer to send it back and tell the person like, hey, can you turn this into smaller diffs so I can actually feel comfortable reviewing this code? We don't have any concept of that in Web3 right now. It's like you're all head down coding. I'm saying you all, as the developers, you don't bring me in until the very end when it's like I could have at the very beginning of this stopped you from doing something stupid. Like I think often smart contract security is more about architecture than it is about implementation. And so I think these protocol devs need to be engaging security professionals at the very beginning of the process rather than at the very end. Not only because it's a bunch of code and it's very easy for me even as an auditor to miss something. And if I miss something, um, there's still a high chance that you're going to end up getting wrecked, right? So you want to actually try and help the smart contract auditor out as much as you can with good documentation. You should be writing like a whole battery of tests. You should have fuzz testing. You should have invariant testing, right? All this stuff. A lot of the protocols I'm auditing don't have hardly any of that stuff, right? Um, the one I was complaining about didn't even have tests. Um, so like just basic software engineering, right, is severely lacking in the space, which is good. If you're a hacker, you're like, great, I'm finding all these bugs, right? Because these people aren't taking, software engineering best practices seriously enough. So that, I mean, there's a couple of things there, right? It's like, I think folks should be engaging security professionals much earlier on in the development process, so I can give you architectural suggestions. But then also, you should have me reviewing incremental changes, just like I would at any other company rather than saving it all for the end and saying, okay, good luck, try and find the bugs in, tens of thousands of lines of code. And then the last thing is I think um, it needs to come from users. Um, Users need to be more selective about where they're deploying their capital. I think people are too easy to just say, like, they'll see a high APY on a web page somewhere and say, oh, 30% APY, wow. And they'll throw their money into it without doing any sort of due diligence. Like, did this team take security seriously? Are they well-known developers that have built stuff in the past? Have they had audits? Have they gone through contests? Do they have bug bounties? Nobody's doing any of that stuff. They're not even reading. Like, I had a tweet like 2 months ago or something that was like, sometimes I wonder why I'm even bothering writing the audit report. Like, you put certain things like centralization risks in the audit report where it's like this person can rug, right? And I often wonder, like, am I auditing a rug pull right now? I don't really know. I put it in the report, but I'm like, are users actually even going to read this thing? I don't know, right? So it's not just can the software engineers get better, but I think the markets also need to force the software engineers to take this stuff more seriously. The problem is you're still going to have these issues like I talked about where they just wanted yAudit to be a rubber stamp in this particular audit. You're still going to have people just getting an audit done to have a rubber stamp and not actually going back and fixing the issues. Um, so I don't know. I know that was a big bit of a rant,
No,
but
no, no.
after doing this for 2 years, I'm starting to get like frustrated. It's like, dude, how's this same stuff still continuing to happen, right? It's quite frustrating.
No, and a lot of projects that I see, it might have like audited by so and so, and they have some type of report. Maybe people read it, maybe people don't, but it's really hard to trust that so and so, and it's really hard for people to go, oh, is this just some random person that they selected to do this, or is this an established organization that has a track record of really well-known audits that have been provided to the public? And I think that informational component is really a huge missing part out of all of this. Um, and
Yeah, it's
oh,
tough. I mean, like,
I know
even as an auditor, go ahead.
no, no, go, please expand on
You
that.
like, you want your brand out there, right? Like, I want to be known as a high quality auditor, but like, there's only so much I can do to like help my brand out so that when people see that my name's on an audit report, they should trust it or whatever, right? So I mean, it's good for everybody. It's good for users. It's good for me. It's good for the protocol when all these things come together and they end up being successful, right? But there, yeah, you're right. There's like Quant or Certic is a good example. Everybody shits on Certic all the time, right? Because they're basically just a rubber stamp farm in the security space. But I saw somewhere like they're getting an insane amount of volume, right? So it's like not stopping people that like anybody in the know in the security space knows that they're a joke, but it doesn't matter. Nobody cares because all they care about is like, did I get an audit done? Yes or no?
Yep, yep, and boosting that brand,
Yeah.
and so that kind of leads me to my next question regarding this, which is, yeah, I think one of the you had tweeted, viewing auditing as kind of nothing more than like parsing the graph of possibilities when you're going
Mm.
through this process. And so, my question is regarding the auditing process. When you do an audit, is this more of kind of like an art, or is there a standard formal verification process that can be followed or needs to be followed, or is this really just based on the auditor and their experience at looking at things?
Yeah, I mean, that, to your point about like it's hard for users to understand whether they should trust the name on an audit report, whether it's an actual auditor's name or even a company's name. Um, Level of skill between different auditors and even auditing firms varies widely, right? You might get people who have no idea what they're doing and they're basically just trying to collect a paycheck. It's sort of up to the protocols also to be like, if I bring you back a report and there's no findings in it, you probably shouldn't come back to me, right? You should be like, okay, this person doesn't know what they're doing. I'm never going to give them any more work. Um, yeah, I think I actually tweeted that because I think somewhere, I think it was the founder of C4, Sock Money Drawer, or whatever his name is on Twitter. Um, he had made a quote in response to the original tweet author, and this is how it ended up on my Twitter feed. And it was something like to the effect of, um, defenders think in lists and attackers think in graphs. And until that changes, we're always going to have these problems. And that I think is a very profound statement. Um, the, the sheer fact of the matter is like smart contract security can't be some sort of formal process. It can't be a checklist. It can't be these things because sort of like by definition, finding interesting bugs means you have to get creative and you have to bring experience to bear. And so in that regard, I feel to sort of answer your question directly, I think it's an art in my opinion. Even just thinking back to my skill level 2 years ago when I first started doing this versus now, um, I've gotten much quicker. Like I think I tweeted this back like maybe a week or two ago where I've gotten quicker at like realizing where I should be spending my time even. And then even when I do spend my time, I'm spending it more fruitfully than I used to. I think back to my first audit, a lot of my time was spent even just wondering if something was a bug or not, right? And as you get better and better, you're more quick to be like, okay, yeah, this is and not only that, but I think, you mentioned my tweet, or I was talking about, I sort of view the code as the one large dependency graph. When I was first starting out, I always did kind of like a depth first search of the dependency graph where I would start at the leaves of the dependency graph and sort of work my way into the core kind of new business logic that the protocol is using. But even then, as I've gotten more experience, I've even started to play with what sort of graph traversals I've done. And I've even gotten better at like it might not be so strict, right? It might be not be a strict depth first search. I think the person who retweeted that original tweet, I wish I could remember who it was. I need to give them credit. Um, but he had mentioned that, oh, it's Curious Apple. Curious Apple, you should follow him on Twitter. He's pretty good. Um, he mentioned an A star search or something like that, right? He likened it more to an A star search, where it is like I think that's where the art comes into it. Is you start to be more insightful based on prior audits and maybe findings that you thought you'd found that ended up being invalid findings. You start to train your kind of neural net of a brain in terms of finding what's important and what's not important and how to more effectively traverse the graph.
Yeah, and I think that's a really hard challenge for people because of the lack of the kind of standardization in the space in general has been a big kind of I don't know, a huge consumer risk for a lot of people. And so, without having kind of an established, organizations or brands or individuals, it's hard to know who to trust. And I think that this is one of the big challenges for this space in terms of security and bugs. But in terms of, I kind of want to shift the conversation a little bit towards the costs of development of smart contract auditing because one of the biggest complaints I've heard from developers is that, hey, I want to get an audit, I really do, but it's very, very expensive, or I don't know exactly how much it's going to cost. And I actually have a group of smart contract developers that I'd rather just kind of share with and go through the audit in an informal way that in that process. Without having any truly individuals with true audit experience to actually look at the code. And I was wondering, like, what is the cost of an audit on kind of a just general scale, and why what are the components that lead to that cost?
Yeah. Um, I think this is where, I was talking about like everybody has their own perspectives in terms of like what's the best approach to sort of like sell this service of security to the developers. And I think this is often where the solo auditors come in and say, this is where we should be able to fit in is, you could hire somebody like Pasha, for example, at, probably, I don't know what he's charging, quite honestly, but I have to imagine it's lower than something like Trail of Bits or something like that, right? And so for people who are just starting out and maybe they've never kind of like put anything on chain before, but they want to be cognizant of security, there are these other kind of alternatives. Um, and in terms of like, yeah, I can't speak directly to cost, right? Because everybody's different. Like even the auditing firms, I worked for a bunch of different auditing firms, but even then, they all have different ways of pricing things and scoping things, and there's always some level of like negotiation between the protocol and the auditing firm, and scoping out the time, right? I will say it's often the charges end up being by sort of like auditor week, kind of, and then sort of by the auditing firm's weekly rate. times the number of weeks that they need to have an auditing team looking at the code is kind of how they'll arrive at the price. Um, you can also use the contest sites to get an understanding of like how much code you have, kind of roughly how much that protocol is paying the contest site to have an audit done on the contest site. That also might give you a good sort of estimation of kind of what it's going to cost to secure your protocol.
Yeah,
Um,
and I
in
guess
terms
my,
of
my like end goal for this question is kind of like what can we do as an industry to actually reduce the kind of the perceived obstacle of getting this type of security input for from auditors and things like that. I know that cost is one, but just generally knowing where to start. Like you said, some of these big protocols may go to Trailbits, but if you're just starting off and you have a small project, maybe there's some like lower end offers or offerings that they can explore. And I'm just curious to know like what can we do as an industry to actually reduce the kind of reluctance to engaging with the security industry.
yeah, I do think that I mean, it would be nice if there was like a marketplace of audit. I think there might actually be one somewhere, like a web page, a centralized web page that you can go to just get like a list of all the auditing firms. Like if I was going to launch a protocol today and I needed to get an audit done, that's probably well, now I'm relatively well connected in the security space, so I kind of know who I would reach out to. But like if I had no knowledge, no connections, no nothing, I would probably get a list of all the auditing firms and reach out to all of them and probably go with the lowest bidder or something like that. Um, I do know that Spearbit is sort of working on. They're calling it the Cantina. I don't know if you've heard of this recent launch of theirs. Where they're trying to sort of build up a marketplace of like solo auditors, and I think that's sort of what they're trying to do. So Spearbit has like a boutique high end firm where they have sort of the top 1% of security talent, and they charge an arm and a leg for it. But I think they were realizing there's all these people kind of lower market, new people or people who haven't launched yet. They don't know what the TVL is going to be like in their protocols, right? This sort of stuff. And they realized they were missing out on a bunch of work because they were sort of such a high dollar firm. And so they thought, okay, let's go start this marketplace. And then I think the idea behind that, somebody who doesn't know anything about bidding or scoping the work or anything like that can sort of just go to the marketplace, find established solo auditors on the marketplace, and you know almost like a Fiverr basically, right? You say or Upwork or something, right? You need a freelance developer, have people submit a bunch of bids to your protocol, and then pick the one that you think is right for you. I think that's kind of what they're trying to build at Cantina. So people are working on this problem in order to solve the problem because everybody's aware that it is a problem.
Yeah, and I imagine like some type of reputation system or some type of
Yeah,
kind of a
yeah.
you know attestation of skills regarding security audits would be really
Yeah, I think
valuable for the
they're
space as
planning on
well.
putting on Cantina basically is like all the audits you've done in the past, like the sort of the logos of the companies next to your profile, so that when somebody goes to your profile, they know, okay, this person's done 10 audits already. I can sort of trust their work.
Yeah, and we at the Token Engineering Commons we have a lot of people who are very experienced in the Web3 space, but we also have a lot of students who are going through the Token Engineering Academy, who are new to the token engineering development, smart contract development. And I guess what are the I wanted to ask what are the biggest mistakes that you see with smart contract development and something token engineers should be looking out for when they start to when they're thinking about creating their first token economic system. Um, yeah.
Yeah, this is a great question. I quite like kind of the way you guys are uh, positioning your brand, because there's a lot of like Web3 engineering. There's a lot of Solidity, learn Solidity, stuff, right? But the real interesting aspect of Solidity and Web3 in general is the whole idea of like incentive design and economic incentive design and stuff like that, right? So I think it's very insightful that you guys are sort of naming your your group in that particular regard, because I do think that's what's actually interesting about the space. And for that reason, I think probably the most important thing you should be doing is determining what the invariants of your protocol are going to be and figuring out ways of protecting those invariants, because all of the sort of biggest DeFi blue chip protocols out there at their core, they are basically a market invariant, and the state of that invariant changes on every block in order to provide some service to both parties. Um, I think the biggest mistake I see people making is they're not cognizant of the fact that they're basically building an invariant, and they need to be protecting that invariant basically in every single function call. As soon as you detect what your invariants are, then you can start there's a concept in the security space called invariant testing. You can start writing tests around that invariant and sort of guaranteeing that invariant in your protocol is always going to hold. But the hard part is not writing the invariant test; it's detecting what the invariant is. And so I think folks should be spending more time thinking about this this aspect of their mechanism design and not the mechanics of writing a Solidity smart contract.
Yeah, and there's a lot of dynamics between that, from we have the technical security, but we also have the economic security and the incentive design that you spoke about.
Right.
When we have kind of these new social behaviors that are enabled because of these functions that you've created through smart contracts. And I'm curious, do you think that the auditing process, like, I mean, in your experience, does the auditing process go beyond the technical in most cases, or is it strictly just, hey, we're looking at bugs, we're not looking at incentive designs or problems with the proposed mechanisms that you've proposed for your community?
Yeah. And I mean, in my opinion, it should be everything. It should be mechanism design, should be economic. At the end of the day, what dictates whether a finding is a like a critical finding or a low finding is basically the economic damage, in my opinion, right? And so if you sort of back up from that, the end goal is economic damage in order to find high critical vulnerabilities, then you automatically assume that's what I should be spending my time as an auditor, is looking at the most economically vulnerable pieces of code. That's sort of what I was saying before about like my compass has gotten better. I stopped paying attention to like less important aspects of the protocol and the smart contracts that I'm like, okay, let's say I do find a bug here, unless I'm able to like totally destroy the or steal money or something like that, then there's not really much of a point in me even reporting on this. So I try to focus my energy specifically on that sort of stuff. And it's most often the case that those are the most interesting bugs, right? Sure, I can find access control modifiers or whatever, and that's great. I'm protecting your protocol. But the stuff that you're most likely going to miss is going to be these economic game theory things. And this is another reason why I was saying at the beginning that I think people need to be engaging security people at the beginning and not at the end, because I can help you design a mechanism that's secure. Because often what will happen is you'll get to the end and by then it's too late. My finding or my sort of report is going to be go back and redesign this thing from the ground up, taking all these learnings that I had from looking at your code. Nobody wants to do that, right? You don't want to spend 3 or 4 months, busting your ass writing this code, coming up with this new product, and then have it me at the end tell you like this is bad and here's all the reasons why you didn't think too deeply about your game theory. Um, that's ultimately why I think people should be engaging security people at the beginning and not at the end is for that reason. Um, the problem is like I said, by at the end of that, you're you're not going to go back. You're not going to go back, and so you just push forward and sort of like you put band-aids over it to like eliminate the findings that I had in my report by putting more code in it. But if your mechanism is fundamentally flawed, no amount of like protection, safety controls is really going to fix that.
Yep, and have you run into projects that kind of like have just decided to just move on and just say, hey, we'll accept the risk?
Yeah, this is what I was saying. That I was talking to Johnny about this morning is, and it was like really annoying. Like I thought deeply about leaving and like quitting smart contract auditing because I was so angry about the situation. Yeah, it's been, I mean, you can imagine, right? I'm really busting my ass trying to find useful stuff to give you in a report, spending a lot of time. I've got a daughter, right? It's like, I'd rather be hanging out with my daughter than looking over your shitty code,
Yeah.
and, and for me to like spend all this time coming up, writing POC, proving to you that it's actually broken, writing up the report, and at the end of it, you just say acknowledge, is like super, super frustrating to me.
Yeah, and there's got to be better kind of consequences for that type of thing, and hopefully we can start to build systems that actually keep these projects accountable who decide
Yeah,
to
I mean,
ignore these things.
this is something I was going to say kind of towards the end of the prior comment we were asking, like about folks, not having the capital right now to get an audit done, or not knowing how to get an audit done, or things like this. I mean, frankly, I do think that's not the worst thing in the world, right? I think the people that I'm mostly throwing shade at are the people who are like, they're forking Uniswap, they're not understanding Uniswap enough to make changes in it. Then they're making changes in Uniswap that break those core invariants that I was talking about before. And then they're not spending any money on security, and instead they're throwing all the money at marketing. And so all this TVL accrues to the protocol, and then they get wrecked, right? That's sort of like, to me, the worst state. If somebody deploys some smart contracts and they keep the TVL below $500,000 or something like that, right? Like even something like that, I'm like totally okay with you skipping an audit, as long as it's when you start going, I have the best protocol on the planet, everybody throw money into it, you start bragging about it on Twitter. That's when I have a problem, where it's like you should be spending more money on security if that's sort of gonna be your go-to-market strategy, right? I think when people are starting out, I don't expect you to throw 50 grand at an audit if you have no money and you're just trying to test the waters and see if your idea is even valuable. Um, why audit sort of spun out of Urine, and even Urine, when they were, I don't know if they're still doing this, but back when I was contributing to Urine, they had this concept of like beta testing the strategies, right? And so they would give strategies like maybe 5 to 10% of the capital, and wait a couple months or so and make sure, like, okay, this is safe, before they actually threw a bunch of money at it, right? You can do stuff like that to sort of like alleviate the risks that you're taking by not getting an audit, right? Um, anyway, I just wanted to circle back on that and let
No,
people know,
yeah,
like, it's fine, it's okay to ship.
and I'm glad you brought up yAuditDAO and Yearn and Y Academy too. Maybe you can speak to that, because I know we have a lot of new token engineers who are actually interested in smart contract auditing and but just maybe don't know exactly where to go to learn more or how to get involved in the industry. And so perhaps you can speak a little bit to your experience at yAuditDAO, the Yearn Y Academy, and Yearn and
Yeah,
their
yeah,
initiatives within the space.
yeah. Yeah, so I actually I got asked this enough times that I was like, I just need to write up a document and like sell it to people. So yeah, I kind of wrote up it's like a roadmap, kind of a PDF roadmap, where it's like, here's all the resources I use to get into the auditing space. And so step one is like, learn Solidity. Obviously, I give you a bunch of resources to go learn Solidity. Step two, I think, is to learn about DeFi. So there's a bunch of resources in it to learn about DeFi. Step three is to learn like vulnerabilities. And so there's a bunch of CTFs that I link to in the PDF. And then step four is these boot camps. And I think there's sort of two, actually there's another one I've just recently heard of, but there's two sort of primary actors in the boot camp space. Um, and they're both free. One of them is Securium, and the other one is Y Academy. I went through both of them when I was sort of learning. Y Academy is interesting because it's a sort of a public good, right? We do it for free. We let people in. We sort of let them audit next to what are called the residents. I'm a resident at Y Academy, so you'll be auditing with me and kind of learning. And at the same time, we're sort of assessing new people who we can sort of convert into Y audit um, actual auditors, right? And so it's this sort of virtuous cycle where we're sort of spreading the word, we're teaching people about security, but it also serves as kind of a recruiting arm to actually bring people in as auditors. So that's kind of what we're doing at Y Academy. You can, if you have any further questions about that, feel free to ask.
Yeah, no, I really, when I first ran into Y Academy, I was really impressed with the structure of it, the fellowship type of structure where you had the residents to kind of like, hey, we have this kind of paid project that we're auditing the set of contracts, and we want you to come over here and audit with us, maybe even take the lead, and we'll follow along with you and show you where you're messing up or what you're
Yep.
missing or if you're looking over something. And I'm wondering, how has that structure worked out in terms of retaining new smart contract auditors and growing the field?
Yeah, I saw a tweet during the last block that was like, somebody had run the numbers and Y Academy is actually more selective than like Harvard or something like that. So we get a lot of inbound. When I first joined, it was, I think I was block number two. So like the word hadn't really spread yet. And so the bar was like kind of, I don't want to throw shade on the people that joined in my same block, but the bar was kind of low back then. And it's gotten higher and higher as like security's become, more commonplace. And then also Y Academy's become sort of well known. We get a large influx of people. And then we have to sort of like whittle it down based on a bunch of different, metrics. We do interviews with people, we give them quizzes, like all this stuff. And I think it's usually around 20 people, we call them fellows, per block. And then I think maybe of those 20 fellows, we end up picking one or two. We do have retention issues though, because we're sort of in a bear market right now, not just in terms of crypto prices, but also in terms of like the amount of work that's going around. Like 2 years ago when I first started, there was just an infinite amount of work that needed to be done. But then, like as word is spread, there's become more suppliers, right? You've got more auditing firms, you've got these contest sites coming up. There's way more options than there used to be, and so the work is getting spread across all these different alternatives. Whereas, like there was only maybe like I don't know 5 or 6 people. Those were the only games in town, kind of originally, and so we don't necessarily have enough work all the time to keep people busy all the time. And so we've had two of our residents end up at Trail of Bits, which so it's like, you know, Trail of Bits is a really
Kind of a
good
stepping
auditing
stone.
firm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're like, okay, I understand kind of why those guys ended up leaving. We also we don't have paychecks either, right? And so for people who need a stable job, they need to go, obviously they need to go get a job somewhere where they're getting income every month or whatever. We're
Yeah.
all sort of freelance at yAudit, and so there might be a month where you don't get any work. Um, for some people, that's just unacceptable financially, right? And so we've had a little
Yep.
bit of attrition as a consequence of that.
Yeah, I think that's the hardest part about it, being able to afford people to stay around and keep that type of employment and being able to reward them for the work that they do provide. But I do think that the value there is that stepping stone too. Like I think that is extremely important for a lot of people to get that experience to sit there and be next to somebody who is seasoned in the process and continuously learn from them.
Yeah, this is why I
And
have
so
it as that part of my roadmap document, because I think where a lot of people fall out of the funnel is they learn Solidity, and I had this problem when I was learning that you learn Solidity, you learn DeFi, you learn the vulnerabilities, but then you go, okay, now what, right? Well, like a lot of people are highly technical, but they don't have like good social skills, or they don't have like business acumen, and they're not willing to cold call people or whatever, right? That's part of the reason why I think that roadmap that I wrote up is so valuable to people, is because it says, okay, like you've done that, now go get some hands-on experience, and here's a good chance for you to go get hands-on experience, start making a name for yourself, and start actually making money, right? Because that's where you start providing value to the community. It's not enough to just know a lot about smart contract security if you're not a practitioner.
yeah, and speaking on that, I just want to give you the floor for a moment to, just kind of address the audience if you want to share some of the projects that you're working on, things to know about within the smart contract auditing space, or if you have any advice to people who are trying to go that route. Um, that'd be really great.
Yeah, I was actually hoping we could open it up for questions. Are we going to do that
Yeah, yeah, we
after?
can do that for sure. We can do
Yeah,
that right
I
now if
mean,
you want to.
yeah. If people have
Yeah,
questions,
yeah.
I'm more than happy to answer them.
Yeah, if you have a question, please hit the request to speak button at the bottom left, and I can add you up here. And I noticed Joseph has his hand up. He is the man behind the TEC right now. So go ahead, Joseph.
Yeah, it definitely a great talk. Love to hear the insight on contract auditing. I was gonna say from a let's say from a consumer and not so super technical point of view, with regards to looking at projects and seeing which ones are audited by who and what was actually found in audit. I've never read one myself, and I definitely after this chat, I definitely want to start reading them. But are the audit reports in easy to understand terms for people less knowledgeable than myself? with regards to, you know, what vulnerabilities were found and what the consequences could be. And then my second question would be, or even just point with regards to the auditing space in general, I would love to see like a auditing ranking website that ranks the people that are auditing out there, to see, you know, who are the best ones, who found the most, you know, who found the most vulnerabilities in certain codes and who didn't. And, you know, because I think that type of centralized information would help people to then look at projects to see like, oh, okay, judging by this leaderboard, they're on the bottom half and they got audited by those people, so I'm not really going to go for that. You know, I'm not really going to invest in that project, rather than, and then obviously you have others that might be at the top of the leaderboard that you would trust more. Just want to hear your thoughts on, you know, the question and kind of the point that I made.
Yeah. Was the first question was about technical ability to read the audit report. So this is like something I've been like banging on about for all the auditing firms that I work for. Is I'm like, who are we writing these reports for, right? If they're for the public, they should be written in a very different way than a report that's written for the protocol. And what ends up happening is we try to thread the needle where it's like, okay, technically our customer is the protocol, and so we write it for them, but we also have to put various things in the report because we're hoping that the public will read them. You can actually go on yAudit. I think yAudit.dev maybe is the URL, something like that. Is there a way for me to like dump links here?
Yeah, I think you can just reply to the space.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yAudit.dev is the URL. Okay, there. So you can go look at sort of some of the past reports we've done for yAudit. What we do is we sort of do like an introduction about like, okay, here's what the protocol is about. Here's the code that we actually looked at, because often what will happen is they'll change it later or whatever, right? So if the protocol gets wrecked, we have a commit that we can point to and say, look, we only audited up to this point and that bug appeared somewhat later or something like that. And then we'll give like a rubric, which is like, you know, okay, you know, was this complex? Was it well tested? Was there a lot of math in this protocol, right? There's a bunch of, it's sort of like kind of a scorecard. And the idea is that that's for the public to read. They can kind of get a quick and dirty understanding of like, where does this protocol fit in? And then below that are all the findings. Now we try to write the findings in such a way that like anybody can read them, but like you're right, unless you have a really deep understanding of the protocol, you might not understand the implications of the findings. But you know, like if I put critical, you know, my header for a finding might say something like critical. Access modifier allows anyone to drain tokens from the pool, right? You don't really need to be that technical to understand like that's a really big deal, and I should be a little weary about putting money into this protocol if they miss something like that, right? So yeah, you do need to be a little bit technical, but hopefully we're writing them in such a way, at least for the yAudit one reports. Also at the bottom, we kind of give a summary where it's like, in this particular case of the one that I was like really pissed off about, we were pretty kind of scathing in that summary, which sort of sucked, right? They're a customer, but we were like, dude, you guys aren't testing. You don't seem to be taking security that seriously, right? You should be sort of trying to read those things and hopefully kind of reading between the lines to get an understanding, like, are these guys shitheads or not? The second question, yeah. So there are leaderboards actually, at least for Code Arena. Let me see. Yeah, right here. There's leaderboards for Code Arena. There's another one for Sherlock. So all these coding or these auditing contests I was talking about before. Sorry, I'm getting to the leaderboard link so I can send them. They all have leaderboards, and this is actually one of the drawbacks I was going to bring up before when Nate was asking about the various different sort of ways of going about getting security talent. Is one of the drawbacks I feel of these contests is that what will happen is the best folks will get to the top of the leaderboard and immediately they'll start getting a lot of work. and so they'll stop participating in the leaderboard because the auditing contests aren't paying nearly as much as if somebody goes off and becomes a solo auditor themselves and starts sourcing work directly from clients. And so you might look at the C4 leaderboard, the Coderino leaderboard, and go, wow, they've got Trust, they've got Pashov, they've got Lambda, they got all these really great auditors. But those guys might not actually be looking at your code if you go take it to one of these contests to get your code audited, because now they've gone off and done their own thing. So I think that's one of the things that these auditing contest sites need to solve is how do they retain the talent and keep them coming back? And I think that's like a non-trivial issue with those particular things. But what I would say is, if you are going, this is what I was saying about the solo auditors. If you can go hire a solo auditor, right? What I would do if I was like strapped for cash, and I really needed an audit done, is I'd go look at who's been on the leaderboard the last maybe 30 days, 90 days or something like that. Sort of try and catch an up and comer, right? It's almost like buying a shitcoin or something like that, right? You try and get in before everybody else. Because that person's really good, but eventually they're going to start charging more for their work because everybody's aware that this person is really good. So that's probably how I would go about it if I was in the position where I didn't have a lot of money.
That's awesome. And if anybody else has a question to ask Jackson, please do raise your hand, or you can request to speak, and I can bring you up here. With that being said, I want to ask you one question before getting responses from the audience. Is that, what is your favorite part of the auditing process?
The end. No, not like that. There comes a point, I think I tweeted about this like a week, or maybe it was a month ago, something like that. There comes a point in the hardest part of an audit is the beginning, because you have zero context and it's a slog. You're trying to figure out how do the pieces fit together, what external dependencies do they interact with, right? That's like all the grunt work that makes auditing really, really hard, and why people don't want to actually do it, because you got to sit in front of your computer forever trying to understand. You're trying to put yourself in the developer's shoes and try and understand why did they make the decisions that they made in this particular implementation. The last like 30% of the audit is the funnest part, because that's once you have a full picture of all the code, then you can start playing around with, like we were talking about, these economic mechanisms and incentives and variants and stuff like that. Once you've honed in on all that stuff, that's when it starts to become fun, because now you're bringing a creative flair to whatever you're trying to do. It's just that it's very hard to get to that point, and it takes a lot of hours really poring over the code before you have a full picture of everything and you can start breaking stuff.
Yeah, that is in my mind probably the best part of it. Just kind of using your imagination of like what possibly could go wrong here,
Yeah,
and
there's a
having
lot
that
of
kind of
jokes.
adversarial thinking.
Yeah, there's a lot of jokes, like memes and stuff, of like when your proof of concept really works, right? Like one of the craziest parts about Web3 security is you can write a test that proves that there's a bug and you took all the money, right? Like you put an assert statement before your hack that says the attacker had $0, and at the end it had $100 million. When that thing runs, there's no feeling like it in the world. You're like, holy shit, I did it.
That's really awesome. Yeah, we need more of it. So, but yeah, I just want to say thank you for coming on today. Is there anything that you wanted to say, promote, shill, anything like that you want to get out there before we end this?
No, not really. Just yeah, thanks for having me on. It was good to chat about. I always like talking about this stuff, right? It's super interesting. So anytime you guys want to have me back on or anything like that, happy to do it.
Would love to. We were just so happy to have you on for our first episode, and I really think this is going to be a really great interview series. And I hope everybody tunes in for further interviews later on. So thank you for joining us, Jackson, and thank you all for attending. Hope to see you around.
Yep. See you, man. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Jackson. Bye.